I want to introduce myself. I'm Skylar Allison. I'm the community manager of CONNECTpreneur. I know quite a few of you, but I am glad to get to know more of you as hopefully we see you attend more and more of our meetings. So thank you for joining the masterclass today, Raising Millions in a Funding Winter. We're glad that you could be here for this informative and educational masterclass today. Just a couple of notes. We will be recording this masterclass, so if you have to leave early or you want to share it with anyone or someone joins late, we'll have that recording. We'll make sure it's emailed to you after the event today. We will be doing two polls today. The first one will be right before Q&A, and the second one will be during Q&A. It's going to be the same poll. It's just to ask you a couple of questions about the class. So just be on the lookout for those. And as I mentioned, Q&A, we will be doing about 30 minutes of a fireside chat type conversation, and then we'll be doing about 30 minutes of Q&A. So with that, if you have any questions at all during the presentation, please feel free to ask them in the chat during the presentation. You can put them in the chat or private message them to me in the chat, and we'll make sure to go over all of those questions for you during that 30 minutes of Q&A after the 30 minutes of fireside chat. So with that, I would like to introduce who we have here today. We have Mike Moore, who is the founder and CEO of MedWatch. And we have Sam Zaidspinner, who is the CEO or COO of MedWatch, and Tian Wong, who is the CEO of CONNECTpreneur. So with that, I would like to turn the time over to Tian, Mike, and Sam to start the fireside chat. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sky. And I want to welcome Sam and Mike and all of you for joining us today. Hopefully it'll be an educational and inspiring story. We're going to have about a half an hour of conversation among Sam and Mike and myself. And the four areas I want to explore are: one, the fundraising journey and strategy that has led to them raising 11.7 million in the last 18 months. Two would be sort of like some challenges and lessons learned. Three would be investor dynamics and relationships that they've kind of encountered throughout the process and their journey. And then the last one would be some key takeaways for founders. And then we'll open it up to Q&A. I know there's a lot of founders on this call. It's great to see everybody. I know some of you guys are struggling with this healthcare investment winter, which has been pretty brutal. I don't need to tell you guys, but that's why we want the MedWatch guys on the call so they can talk about their story a little bit. And I'd love to start with Mike. So in terms of navigating the funding winter, right? You guys started on this journey, say 24 months ago, and then you started getting capital to the point where you're almost at 12 million. What specific strategies did you use to stand out to investors during such a challenging time?
One of the things that I think have helped is the team, and we really went out of our way to recruit highly skilled, highly experienced individuals. So the team really helped us stand out, as well as our technology. So we've been relentless on developing our technology. We've been very aggressive. We're already working on our 7th generation. So it will just relentless pursuit of excellence, really.
I want to stop you for 1 second. You said the team. Do you have any thoughts or insights as to what specific elements of the team were particularly attractive to your investors?
Well,
because everyone has a great team, right? You have great advisors, you have a lot of PhDs, you have a lot of scientists, but what about your team was different?
Our team has been there and done that. It kind of sounds like a cliche, but they all have a deep experience, right? We had subject matter experts in clinical trials and the research, electrical engineering, AI, et cetera. And so one of the other things, I think we deliver with what we say. I think the team's humble. We recognize the challenges, and we've been brutally honest with potential downsides or risks. So investors go in open-eyed, and I think they appreciate the brutal honesty. So I think
brutal honesty. That's a good, and humility. So continuing on my question about your fundraising journey, can you share your experience working with angel groups and small private investors? Because that seems to be a group that varies, right? Like they might be hot, they might be not so hot. They're also very individual. as
Yep.
opposed to sort of an institutionally backed, say, VC fund. What worked well, and what should our founders know about approaching these types of investors? Good, bad, and ugly, please.
Yeah. First, let me talk about the groups, whether it's CONNECTpreneur and other platforms. Uh, you meet a lot of fantastic individuals at those on those platforms, right? And not only have we gotten capital through those platforms, we've gotten team members. So I see many faces here, and I think there's like 5 pages, so I'm just looking at one one screen of all the faces, and I recognize some of you. I know some of you are alums of CONNECTpreneur, and you may have been on other platforms. But as yourself, you got a diverse group, a lot of highly skilled individuals on this call and in other groups. And a lot of times those relationships, they start on events like this, and they've led to us recruiting a couple of individuals that we've added to the team. So it's a great networking tool from a team building perspective, but also from a capital raising perspective. Now, from a capital raising perspective, it's tough. You have to have everything all lined up. People or investors want to see good documentation. They want to see a good team. They want to see good decks. And they want to see realistic projections. As Tian mentioned, the humility. And you don't get the investors on one meeting. Sometimes it takes 3, 4, 5. And there's been some investors I've courted for over a year, and it's like dating, right? You get to know one another, but you don't progress to a serious relationship until much later. And some of these individuals we've met have invested after a whole year and maybe 4 or 5 or 6 interactions. So you have to be consistent. They like to see progress, and I think that really resonates. Every time I speak to an individual that I've spoke to before, I give them an update, and they see the traction. So traction is really important. And once you get an investor, we mine that investor, so to speak. We ask for introductions, and many times we travel. Sam and I have traveled a lot, and traveling takes a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, it
Uh,
takes money to raise money, not
yeah,
just to make it. But you had mentioned that before. I'd love to talk about that. Like, how did
yeah.
you allocate your resources, financial and otherwise, during this process?
Well, I'll get to that in a second, but for the allocation, when we have an investor that's come on board, we typically travel and meet them depending on the caliber of investor. We're dealing with investors that are usually putting in a minimum of 50,000 or more. So I know some of you might be targeting $5,000, $10,000 investors, and it's kind of hard to travel and do some of these other things when they're coming in at the smaller amounts. But we usually have a dinner or a lunch for them and ask them to invite investors that they know, many of them they co-invest with. And we haven't had a specific budget for that. It's fluctuated depending on where we're at. But Sam and I have frequent travel, and so we usually allocate a couple flights a month and a couple dinners, and we try not to go overboard, right? We're trying to preserve our capital the best we can.
Yeah. Can you talk about maybe you talked about sometimes you have to meet with people 4, 5, 6 times. Um, I get that, right? Investment groups get busy, they're diligencing deals at the end of the year. They don't have time to look at new deals or whatever. But what was the fastest check you got from the time you met them till the time the money hit the
Uh,
bank? And what was special about it? Why did that money go so fast?
I'm gonna let Sam share that one. So.
Well, yeah, my previous venture is a company called Irricept. It's a class 2 surgical irrigation device, and it's used in hospitals to reduce infection. And we started a call with a plastic surgeon, and we started the call. We barely even introduced ourselves and said, "Hey, do you know Irricept?" And he said, I just used it today, 6 bottles for a case, and there was a high risk of infection and trained residents on how to use it." He said, why do you ask? I said, well, I launched Irrecept and grew it. So he said, and within 4 minutes, he was in for $250,000. It is the
Wow.
shortest, it was the shortest time frame.
It was
He's not-
serendipitous. He kind of knew the product, so there were some mitigating circumstances there, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
He knew the product, he knew how the company that we had built, and I said, well, this company's gonna have huge, what we're building with MedWatch Technologies is gonna have significant impact. And Irrecept had significant impact, and he knew what it took, and he had invested in other startups, so he was a fan. Yes, TM.
So you guys have done like 11.7 million. How many investors comprise that total?
I don't know the exact number, but it's just over 100.
100 investors. Gee, that's a lot of
Yep.
meetings.
Yeah.
Um,
A lot of meetings.
I want
lot.
to have some questions about that, but I do want to talk about traction. You had mentioned your technology and, you know, and I know you got 100 investors. You probably met with, several hundred at least. How critical is demonstrating traction to these investors? Whether it's, milestones of clinical, regulatory, market related, getting funding, or does it just vary across the board?
It varies a little bit, but for the most part, I think some investors aren't as sophisticated as others, and we only deal with accredited investors. So there's
Yeah.
a definition of sophistication there, right?
Yeah.
But some of them go really deep on due diligence. We've had some angel groups that have had a whole slew of members, and they had whole teams that came in and used their expertise on certain things. Like one angel group that came in, they had their individuals that had experience with patents or intellectual property, and they did a deep dive on that. Then there were the go-to-market folks, then the clinical trial folks, and so they looked at all aspects. So they went really deep, and once you have that due diligence done, and they're attesting to it or signing off, if you will, and then all their other members feel a lot more comfortable than they pile in.
Right. Did you find it's typical with groups, if you get a couple of lead people that are very vocal and they'll write a small check that gets the rest of the group in, or did you present to groups where you only had one or two check writers?
No, and Sam, you might have some thoughts on this, but I think we've got 3 venture groups that have come in, and I don't remember what the numbers were. Some of them, I think the smallest was maybe 7 members. Actually, I think we've got four groups that came in, and maybe 7 members is the fewest. But usually they're pretty proactive, and they really like our value proposition, and so they've been our best salesmen, if you will. They've been out there telling everybody about it, and they've driven a lot of investors. We've got a couple other investors that came in personally, but they may have brought in 6, 7, 8, 9 people, good friends of theirs that they co-invest with and had previously had a track record with or participated in investments. And it's fantastic to get somebody out there like that that's really supportive and buys into your thesis, and they really help make it a lot easier. But there's a lot of follow-up. We have very good documentation and good decks, industry reports. There's certain things going on in the industry that affect us, and we do our own analysis on it and do a report. Such as Dexcom.
Yeah.
They're one of our competitors. So when something happens in the market, we do an internal assessment, then we share it, and that goes a long way. And we've done a lot of due diligence on our competitors. So we have our competitive database, and we have our frequently asked questions, and that's been a fantastic tool that helps facilitate things. And so just having the resources to make it easy. And one other thing that's really helped is to reduce friction. I've been involved in companies. I'm also an investor, and I've had PPMs sent to me and all the investor docs, and you got to sign it, you got to scan it, write a check, send it in. And just about everything we do is electronic. So we use DocuSign on all our documents. We use safe notes initially, which are a lot easier, and I'm sure we'll get into the different instruments.
Mhm.
But you want to make it frictionless for your investors, and that's a lot of them are really busy professionals and they're high net worth individuals and they just want to deploy capital, but they don't have a whole lot of time and they spend a lot of time on the due diligence. So you have to make it as easy as possible for them.
Speaking of due diligence, do you maintain an electronic data room and give them sort of the keys to the data room, or do you actually reply to information requests sort of by sending them info that they requested? How do you guys handle that?
Sure. We do have a data room and there's certain things we share, but most of the data room we do not share with the individual investors unless they're a much larger investor or they're part of a group. We have also hired our own in-house counsel that's fractional. That's really helped get our legal documents in order and structured, and they have a lot of experience. And so we have a full data room that we share, but that's for our Series A lead and a couple others. Normal, what I'll call retail investors, we don't share that, but we typically allow them to speak to anybody in the company that they want to. We've made all the executives available. We go through the data, our everything. So
Yeah, I mean, I have another question on governance. How important is governance? Are you guys too early for sort of having, robust governance procedures and processes in place? I mean, did that ever come up with investors?
um, it hasn't come up specifically, but we're always asked about governance. But what I will tell everybody on this call from my own experience, you should consider governance on day one. I've been involved in companies, and some of you might fit what I'm about to say. If you haven't done your board resolutions and documented, you haven't done your meetings, your shareholder meetings, that's all so important. You have to have your documentation in order because when you're at a position where you're courting more significant investors or a larger dollar amount, they absolutely will go through your due diligence and all, all your all your files. They'll look at your resolutions, your employment contracts, your shareholder agreements. That's all part of due diligence and your data locker, right? And governance. You have to have good governance, otherwise you're in trouble.
What about the board of directors? I've heard it from different some investors say it's too early. You don't need to worry about a board with independent directors. And others are like, they not only do they want a board, they want a board seat. Did that ever come up, or are you too early for that?
Um, for earlier investors, um, I may have had somebody ask about a board seat and it's a simple no, right? Because if they're putting in 50, 100,000, I'm like, no, we're not wasting our time. But if they're putting in a couple $1 million, then absolutely we would consider it. And we're negotiating a board seat for our Series A lead, but that's north of $5 million, right? And so that's something you have to consider. Having a board, a proactive board, is probably one of the most important things you can also do. I've been involved in companies where the founder stacked a board with their friends that don't challenge them and they rubber stamp what the CEO wants to do. And that's one of the worst things you can do. You need unvarnished feedback and you need to be coachable. I've had interest in companies where the CEO would not listen, wouldn't entertain refreshing the board. My board is initially it was my co-founders, right? But everybody has skin in the game and they're highly knowledgeable, experienced individuals. But as time goes, we will diversify that board. But you need to have that feedback. As a military guy, I'm 30 years plus military. I like to use an analogy. If somebody doesn't tell you what's wrong on a battlefield or in an environment, people can die. And with ours, we have a medical device, right? People could die if we do something wrong. You, as business owners, if you don't do something right, your business can die. You need that feedback, and a strong board challenges you and makes you better.
Yeah, excellent point. We have about 10 minutes and then we'll kick off the question and answer. So I have a few more questions before we go to the audience. And to the audience, go ahead and put your questions into the chat box so that Skylar can kind of get that process organized for when we start Q&A. Deal structures, right? You mentioned safe instruments. You guys have raised money using different mechanisms, right? You've used safe instruments, you've used convertible notes, priced rounds. Can you walk in less than like 2 minutes? Can you walk us through the pros and cons of your thought process relative to safes and convertible notes and priced rounds?
Sure. So far, we haven't had a price round. We're negotiating a price round with our Series A lead. So all of our investments initially were safes, which is a simple agreement for future equity. And they're a, a frictionless document. They're usually a single document, maybe 4 pages or so. And the thing that's nice about a safe is you don't have to know your valuation. You don't have to fight and defend it because it's a future value, right? A simple agreement for future equity. So the equity will be converted at some time in the future. And so that makes it nice. They usually want to know that there's a valuation cap, so they know when it converts, they'll get an X amount, and usually there's a discount. And so safes are fantastic. More sophisticated investors tend to like convertible debt notes. And as we grew, we ran into more sophisticated investors and they wanted convertible debt notes. The downside with convertible debt notes, and they still convert later and you have a valuation cap, we had a generous discount on our safe and our convertible debt note of 20%, which is pretty generous. And so they know they will convert at a future time. And they also have interest. And we personally gave 10% interest, some have less. And so they're getting a really good deal. But if you fail to execute, and let's say it's 5 years, now you have 5 years of interest. And if you have a cap, you could really get screwed. They could wind up owning the majority of your company, right? And so that's the downside. So you really need to execute and don't price it too low, but it has to be where it's attractive.
Got it. Thank you so much for that. On relationships, right? In terms of the investor dynamics and building relationships, fundraising, I think it's pretty evident that it comes down to trust, relationships among the parties. What strategies did you and Sam use to sort of build and nurture relationships with potential investors over time? I assume, would you say that that's why some of these groups wanted to meet with you 3, 4, 5, 6 times? Was that part of the relationship development?
Yeah.
Can you comment on that?
Part of it is just that they want to get to know you, see if there's any red flags, personality defects, or what have you. I did see one chat pop up, and maybe that will come into the Q&A, but it was post money is what we did. But anyways, they want to know your personalities, right? And it's a significant investment for many people. There's some individuals, if they're smaller investors, $10,000 is a heck of a lot of money. For others, professionally, maybe 50,000 is the equivalent of 5,000 for somebody else. It's a significant choice, and there's lots of things they can deploy their money into, and so they want to be comfortable with you. And so it's all getting to know you. It's, as you said, it's relationships.
Let me add to that.
Yeah, please, Sam.
So Mike had alluded to dinners that we had. So one of the things that we found that was very effective is when we did connect with people and start building relationships and start showing traction and progress and building credibility, what we would do is have dinners where we then had 2 or 3 people that already had invested with us. And what we found that events like this and broad events in the early days, we stopped doing these for the last several months, but in the very beginning, an event like this is very helpful. We would get really a couple people that might have interest. And what Mike indicated then, when at an event like this with a couple hundred people, the expectation is you might find 2 or 3 people that have interest, that is the kind of the odds. And then that have significant, and then what we found is then we would build relationships with those people. We'd fly out, and if they did move forward with investment, we then would say, all right, well, if it was Scottsdale, Arizona, which it turns out we actually had quite a bit of interest in that area, we would fly out to Scottsdale. We'd have those 2 or 3 people that are investing. They would then invite 2 or 3, 4 people, and we'd have a room of 15 people that all were connected to us through warm relationships. And that, what we found is 2 things. One is they're coming to the meeting because of a relationship, because of a warm referral, and then because we then would have more warm, intimate conversation in a small group after we got through a meeting like this and got connected and so on. It was those small, more intimate meetings that led to which we actually invested heavily in. Deanne, you indicated having budget. We had a certain amount of budget to do events like CONNECTpreneur, and then we would also allocate budget for the follow-up, and that follow-up had a lot to do with travel and dinners to build relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so impressed by the fact that you guys have gone into this with a expectation of this is going to be a long slog. It's going to cost money. I got to grind away. And I think that has a lot to do with your guys' success, treating this as a sales process, the fundraising as a sales process, and making sure that just knowing that this is going to be difficult, and I think you guys have been around the block many times. I know you've had some successful outcomes in the past, and, you've kind of learned it. I think for some of our less experienced founders on the call today, this is a really key lesson. But we're going to open it up for Q&A in 2 minutes. But I have a final question here. Sam and Mike, if each of you could come up with one key lesson learned throughout this journey over the last 2 years, being able to grind away and raise not an insignificant amount of money from 100 investors during an absolutely awful fundraising environment, what one piece of advice would you share to the other founders on this call who are raising?
You want to go first, Sam, or you want me to go first?
You go first, Mike.
One piece of advice. There's lots
Your
of
top
that
piece of advice. Yeah.
Follow up. And that's all in one word. You have to have follow up.
Yeah, and my one thing is actually, Tien, the last thing you said. You've got to go into it with a process. This is an intense, grinding process. When you are an early stage company and you're not ready for institutional investors, there is no shortcut. You can't get a check for $5 million when you're, from an institutional investor when you're just getting started in the earliest stages. It's a grind. It's a process. Make sure you go into the mindset and that it is that, and then have a great organized process. Me and Mike complemented each other really well, and we had organization around the process. So, having an organized process that works to make sure that you essentially don't miss anything to follow up. That's my top number one thing.
Thank you guys so much. You guys are poster children. I mean, I have, I can confess here, full disclosure, having worked with you guys for a couple of years, I know how hard you guys are working. There's no surprise. It's sort of like when you look at the success that anybody has, an actor, a musician, an athlete, success is correlated to hard work. And you guys, really kudos to you all. I'm so happy to hear the great news, and just so proud of you guys as CONNECTpreneur alumni, and keep up the great work. I know we have a poll. If there's any investors on the call who are interested, maybe we can put up a poll. But I would love to turn it over to our awesome community manager, Skylar. Do we have questions and we have about a half an hour for Q&A, guys. And if you want to stay in touch with Mike and Sam, we'll get you their contact info and all that fun stuff. But I'll turn it over to Sky now, and I'll interject some questions here and there. But Sky, go for it.
Yeah, definitely. So we do have some questions. I do want to start at this one just since we just had talked about your one piece of advice, Mike, and someone was wondering, is it as simply as following up with the investors we meet, or can you emphasize more on your follow-up piece?
Sure. Well, for the specific investors, you got to follow up with those investors. talk to other fellow investors, VCs or other angels. They're like, hey, I met this great company and I told them I was interested, and they never got back to me. Hey, you're trying to raise money, you don't follow up, you're not going to get anywhere, right? Follow up is just like everything else. If you don't follow up, are you going to do your governance? I mean, it's a cornerstone, right? And as Sam said, it's a process and it's a grind. We have a methodical process, and for the investors too, I don't like being hard sold on something. You know how people make the joke about the used car salesman, right? Lots of pressure. We don't pressure anybody. Not all investments are for everybody. And I've had referrals that have led to investments from people I talked to that just weren't interested, but they liked us personally or it resonated. Maybe they liked real estate or some other field because that's where their area of expertise and comfort is. And Sam and I both believe in karma, so whether it's another startup such as you guys on this call, or another investor, we make introductions all the time.
I want to say one thing. I was in Las Vegas with Mike at a conference about a year ago, which we co-hosted, and Mike was not only there to raise money, he introduced investors to other investors. He was introducing other founders and presenters to other investors, and I love that about you, man. I mean, it does, what goes around comes around, and that might be another key learning. I didn't want to interrupt, but I wanted to say
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, people want value, and you need to be valuable to them. You don't want to be a parasite, and not that saying we're any of us are parasites that are taking money from investors, but they want to get a good return. But it's a two-way street, right? You're building a relationship, and you try to help them out. Our Series A lead has another company, and we actually introduced them to somebody that they um, brought on as their interim CEO. They had a need and we helped them fill that need. And it's all gratis quo. We're not getting anything for it. It's karma. Try to help other people and they appreciate it and they reciprocate.
Thanks, Mike. And I do want to mention that we have a lot of questions to get through.
Sure.
So if we
I'll
want to
try to be
just
brief.
make sure, no, it's okay. Yeah, just a heads up to make sure that, we have a lot of questions. So the next one is, how do you give out shares or equity with over 100 investors?
So for investors, if it's a safe note or convertible debt note, there's a cap. The numbers are going to be the numbers. However much they come in, they're getting that percentage of equity, right? And so that's relatively easy. On a Series A or a price round, you're negotiating your price. You typically don't want to give up more than 10 or 15%, 20% at the most per round because of constant dilution. I'm not afraid of dilution. A lot of people are, but you need to build value. And if you're increasing value, even though your equity or percentage of ownership is decreasing, your value is going up. So don't be afraid of dilution, yet you need to protect it and not have too much. The other thing, as far as equity, that's as far as giving out, that didn't seem like you asked, but for employees, we allocated over 20% of our cap table to stock options, and that allowed us to recruit great people. And so don't be stingy with your equity. I've got another investment. The CEO still owns over 50% of the company. You got to be able to share that equity to recruit a great team, right? You can't do it all by yourself. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thanks, Mike. Okay, next question is, how will you determine if the product pricing is reasonable and provides good value?
Mike, let me answer that one.
Sure,
With
go ahead.
lots of data.
Absolutely.
It's that simple. We have in our presentation what we think it is, but we tell our investors that this is based on a very limited amount of data, and this is what we put forth based on the work we've done. But part of the Series A capital raise is that we're going to have a substantial effort to make sure that we optimize the pricing. Getting your pricing right is one of the most important strategic decisions when you're launching a medical device or any product, really. So we have something in our deck and we believe we can stand behind it. We have some data, but as we communicated our lead Series A, we're gonna have a lot more data before we roll out and make sure that it's a data-driven decision.
Perfect. Thanks, Sam. Next question is, how do you find and get in touch with high net worth individual investors, and do you use any platforms to reach out to investor groups?
We've used a couple of platforms in the past, such as Gust, and that gets you to these funds, but not to the individuals. Really, most of it's been relationships at events such as this, or somebody we know, or somebody that's a connector, and leverage those relationships, and they connect us. But usually it's friends of friends of friends, and of friends in some cases. Go ahead, Sam.
Mike, let me add to it. So there are a lot of really great angel network platforms out there. There's Gus, there's Star XYZ, there's God, there's 4 or 5. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting, but there's several of them out there. Our advice is you use them to figure out which ones you want to get to. But then what we did is we went to our network to figure out how do we get a warm connection into that angel group. And we would use LinkedIn. And that the only success we had wasn't blindly using those platforms. It was using them, figuring ones we wanted to get into, and then figuring out how do we, through LinkedIn, through our team, who do we know anybody that's part of that angel group? And then we would then have a warm, hey, can you make an introduction? Because again, relationships. You can get we found that the only way we would get to move forward, and we did get investment from that activity, was when we submitted an application, but then had a warm connection follow-up. That was, so they're great, but you have to merge you have to merge them with relationships.
Okay, wonderful.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that,
yeah.
Sam? Scott, thanks. So are you saying that if I go into an outreach to an investor without a relationship, that my chances are like close to zero? Was that your experience? Or are you saying that having that relationship will at least get some more attention? And the reason I'm asking is, like, I get this question also all the time. Like, people, and all the investors that I know, they want that warm relationship. I'm thinking that if people were going to send out a cold introduction without, a warm person, the chances are going to be very low. I don't know. What was your experience? Did you ever?
Let me tell you my exact experience,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
what Mike and I agreed on is
Thanks.
we do other than these kind of meetings where we're like this kind of meeting, we do very little with cold broadcasting. We actually do, well, when I say very little, we stopped doing it about a year ago because it didn't get any results, and you do, when you're trying to do something really difficult, you do more of what works and you stop doing what doesn't work. The cold networking didn't get us. It was, the odds were so little. We spent all of our energy on warm networking and figuring out where we want to be. That my answer to the last question was, the question was about the platforms, these angel platforms. What I was saying is, what we found is the cold submission of our application through those platforms doesn't get a result, or they get a very generic result. And why? Because these platforms are looking at hundreds of opportunities per week. How do you get to the top of the stack? Through a connection that says, hey, let me explain, we're in the queue there, we followed your process, we're in there, but let me have a chat with you to put us in front of your investor committee. And sometimes we were told, no, we're not a fit, and sometimes we move forward. So does that answer your question, Jim?
It really does. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, great. Next question is, what did you discuss during the dinners? Was it a pitch or was it Q&A style interaction?
We typically go through our pitch deck and walk them through. And if they sign an NDA, then we go through our clinical trial data and do a deep dive on it. And then we open it up for Q&A, and there's no holds barred. Anything and everything they ask, we'll try to answer it.
Okay, great. What are the best and worst aspects and tips for follow-up? How do you avoid being overly aggressive or overly passive?
Good question. Mike, I
I'll
can
let
answer.
you
It's
answer
kind
that,
of a
Sam.
process. Again, we talked about process. So and Mike said, we essentially would send an email, we met wherever. Thanks. We're glad to meet you. Here's all of our information. And then we had a process where we followed up usually 3 to 5 days later if there was no response. And if there was no response after that, one more follow-up email or what we usually find is some people are super busy. They don't check their emails. So if no response from the email, another few days later, we would text them if we have their number. Hey, we met a blah. And then if they don't respond to that, we move on. We don't, I mean, so to answer your question, you just gotta, if either they remember you and they want to respond, or we stopped after that. They would just go to the list of people. We had a list of people that we followed up with and there was no response. But usually that was it. My advice is probably the key advice is not some of the super busy. Some people are super busy and you can only get to them through text. And if you met them and you have their card, send them the email. Usually is where we always started with that. And if we didn't get a response, then we would text once, maybe twice if we really, really wanted to talk to them. And then we stop. Because like you said, you don't want to be annoying. You want to be respectful. So that was it.
Another thing that pertains to respect, that I usually ask after a couple times, I said, hey, if this isn't in your wheelhouse, just let me know and I'll stop following up or what have you. And I've had more than one investor tell me they really appreciate me asking, because some of them aren't assertive themselves. They won't tell you, no, this isn't my wheelhouse. And you keep trying to follow up with them and you're wasting your time and their time. And a couple of those, it didn't fit, but again, back to karma, I made introductions to them and it developed into a good friendship. And so out of those friendships come other introductions later on. So just because it's not in their wheelhouse doesn't mean it's not worth having that relationship.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question is, how has D&O insurance been dealt with for you?
We do have D&O insurance, and so we've had a couple investors ask about it. Most of them don't, but I think um, I don't think we usually tell all of them that we have it. More sophisticated ones, we do, but we do have D&O insurance.
Okay. Next question is, how do you get investors involved as a health tech startup when your pre-sale are 5 million and you need gap funding?
And say that again, please.
It says, how do you get investors involved as a healthcare or as a health tech startup when your pre-sales are at 5 million and you need gap funding?
I can probably answer that. I can probably help
Please.
answer that. So the fact that you have pre-sales is great. I think it's a matter of what we found is if you're a health tech, one of the things we found, Mike, I'll say this and you can build on it, is talking to people that understand the market you're going after so that they instantly understand. So my advice to whoever asked that question is that focus on the professionals that you're actually targeting. If it's a device that's for anesthesiologists, for example, actually try to network with anesthesiologists because they're going to get it right away. And then the fact you have pre-sales, they then become part of the pre-sales. They actually say, yeah, I would actually use it too. I would focus in on the actual end users as investors because they will understand how much risk you've eliminated with the work that you've done in the pre-sales. And we did that ourselves as part of what we did. Several of our investors are people that would endocrinologists and people that would wellness clinic doctors that would prescribe and use a glucose tracking device that we're developing. So, Mike, do you want to add to that? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. There's a lot of questions to get through, so.
Perfect. And this one is a little bit of a statement slash confirmation question. It says, in regards to the process and grind, not getting institutional investors depends, of course, also on your project. Is it instantly producing sales versus years of research and a potential unicorn, or a total flop at the end? Or am I mistaken?
We do have a couple institutional investors, one that's a small VC, another one that's kind of like a hybrid VC, family office, private equity group. There's VCs that like all different stages, right? Some are seed stage, some are Series A or later. So I'm not quite sure how to answer that one. There's investors for all phases of your company, though.
I want to add to that, Mike,
please.
is one of the things that Mike and I talk about process we did is we identified that we're not going to get money from institutional investors in the earliest stage, and our pre-seed and our seed. We finally got an institutional investor at the very end of the seed. But what we did do is we spoke to institutional investors intentionally to get the no. And let me explain why. What we did is we spoke to over 20 institutional investors as part of our process. And the spirit of it was, we know we're too early, but we want to understand at what point are you interested? And that data was extremely helpful for two reasons. One is we made sure that what we spent, like we knew we had to spend our energy and our time and our dollars on, because we know how to develop and launch products and build companies. However, it helped us to also laser focus on what the institutional investors want to see, so that we then did those things and then we're able to finally get in, we got some institutional money towards the end of the seed round, and we're finally at a point where we are attracting institutional money. So the point is that, yeah, definitely, even though you may be too early, have a chat with them with the expectation of, hey, we just want to make sure at what point are you interested, so that you can and then as we said all along, you then have a relationship with them. You're building a relationship, and then they'll tell, and then it goes, when you're finally ready, you can say, hey, I'm ready. Is this a fit, or you want to refer us to somebody else? And that we've had that exact thing happen. So
Good, Sam.
Perfect. Next question is, how did you decide your pre and post money value cap on your safes?
Advice from our lawyer. In many respects, it can be arbitrary, but we had a rough idea of how much it was going to cost to do what we were doing, and we set it there. Initially, we had our valuation set at 50 million, and we brought in a lot of money at a 50 million cap, but we had some pushback, and so we never had a down round, but we did adjust it to 50 million, and everybody that came in at 50, we honored it at the 25, and so they got twice the value, and I think they really appreciated that we were willing to do that. Then as we matured, then we stepped it up to 50, and now we're negotiating significantly higher than that.
Let me add to
go ahead,
that
Sam.
and just say, one of the things we learned when I joined with Mike 2 years ago, is he had brought in some money from the closest friends and family, and they didn't challenge the valuation. And really, my message in answering that is, let the market help you decide. You speak to enough investors, they will tell you what you're worth. We basically spoke to enough with our plant in those earliest days. We were, they told us this is, and when we changed to that, we then were able to bring in all the money we needed in our seed round. So that was, well, no, that was in our pre-seed round. So that was, listen to the market as the message. And when you go beyond your initial friends and family, and you're going to investors that you've gotten to through a warm relationship, they're going to help you. They're going to tell you what value they'll invest in. And if you hear the same answer 10 times, which is what we heard, we adjusted and we realigned and we moved forward, and it worked.
Okay, great. What kind of periodic reports do you send to actual or prospective investors, and how often?
That's a great question. We don't send it to potential investors typically, but to actual investors, we have quarterly updates written, and we also do Zoom calls, such as format like this, where we present all the updates over the previous quarter. Then we open it up to a Q&A.
Okay, great. And we are going to continue the Q&A. I'm just going to put up that poll one more time. Please only answer it if you missed the first poll. It's the exact same questions as the first poll, but this is just for people who happen to join late or they didn't get the chance to answer the first poll. And if you already answered it, feel free to push that little red X in the top left corner. Okay, next question is, can you talk about the impact and importance of selecting the correct lead investor, and what role the lead investor will play in helping others invest?
Yeah, Sam, you want to answer that, or you want me to answer it?
Yeah, I'm going to give it a crack. So we've been fortunate that we spoke to a lot of institutional investors, and we had one step forward that we really are excited to align with. You really just, our message to everyone here is that it is your choice who you want to align with. If you talk to enough investors institutional investors, you're going to get a feel for which ones really align with what you're trying to do and your culture and your vision. And that's who, we believe we have that with our lead Series A. We have a vision and they're aligned with. And my advice would be to make sure you talk to plenty so that you're not just picking the first one you speak to. Make sure you get one that aligns with what you're trying to do, that you truly believe that their team can help you to accelerate, because and that's the number one thing is you want a team, you want an investor. I know it seems you want an investor that truly can add tremendous value and help you accelerate because of their experience and their team. So that's really the advice.
Okay. How much have you raised over time from pre-seed, seed, Series A, etc.? And how soon will you need another round of funding?
We brought in 2.3 million in the pre-seed round, and then 4.5 million in the seed round. And then we did what we called a bridge or pre-series A, but it was on the same terms as our seed because it was a convertible debt, so it would convert later. And we did 4 million there. And now we're negotiating on our Series A lead. And we've got 2 commitments totaling $10 million for our Series A that we're hoping to close in the first quarter. And so we're really starting to ramp up our capital needs and expand the clinical trials.
Okay, great. How detailed is the use of proceeds and plans you would present to seed round investors?
And for seed round investors, we basically had maybe 5 or 6 buckets of where it was going, and that allocation. We didn't go into a whole lot of detail because that's just too much detail for seed investors. I think just the general overarching themes. How's that sound, Sam? About
And that
right.
was it. It was a slide. The detail we had on the seed round was twofold. It was what Mike just said. It was a slide on our deck that had the few buckets, maybe a handful of how we're going to use the proceeds, accompanied by financial projections, which that was it. It was and that was a fairly high level financial projections at the seed round, as opposed to the Series A. It's detailed to the nth degree. And every assumption can be looked at now with our Series A investor, but seed round, high level.
Okay, great. Next question is, you had mentioned that an NDA in your last comment. So what do you do with investors who say that they don't sign NDAs? Do you move forward with them in the funnel, or do you just move on with them?
A lot of investors, more specifically, venture capitalists won't sign NDAs, but we require it from all our investors. So we'll share information initially. We only require it when we get into our clinical data because there's a lot of insight. I wouldn't be overly concerned with NDAs for some of your businesses. Most investors aren't trying to steal your business idea, but for us, we had a lot of very sensitive information, so we required it.
Mike, let me add to that.
Yeah, please.
Let me add to that. So we, again, process. We had a pile of information that we shared without an NDA. And that was our process. There was a significant amount of information. And then, so my advice is you have to build what you built. And then we had another pile that was shared after an NDA. So we were very disciplined about that. You have to share without an NDA enough information for an investor to be able to come to the conclusion that they want to go deeper and have a desire to sign an NDA. So our advice is we had a pretty substantial package that included, again, the pitch deck, but also FAQs, background on the market. But as Mike indicated, we held back on anything that went deep into how the technology worked and all the results of our clinical data. But if someone signed an NDA, we would go deep into all that. But the point is, you have to share enough so that they wanted to sign an NDA. So that was the trick.
Got it. And I know we have about 5 minutes left. And so we have just a few more questions I'll go through. And I know everyone's asked such good questions, so I'm trying to make it through most of them if we can. Next one is, have you had any experience with outreach to family offices with impact investing?
We've talked to a lot of family offices. Most family offices for impact investing want to deploy larger amounts. And we were too early, but now that we're getting at the Series A, now we're about that phase. So that's coming up, but we haven't had a lot of experience with it. Some conversations about it though.
Okay. What was the status of sales and revenue at $50 million valuation?
It, still currently today, we are pre-revenue. We're in clinical trials. We do have letters from groups that want to use our device, but technically it's illegal for us to sell our device or market it. So we've got letters of interest, and so we're pre-revenue.
Okay.
I know
How much have,
I
oh
jump
yeah,
in real quick on that, Mike, because a lot of the guys on the call today are pre-revenue, and we've had hundreds of Connectpreneur presenters every year. A lot of them, well, not all of them, but maybe a third at least are pre-revenue. I mean, I don't know if it's conventional wisdom or myth, but so you're living proof that investors do not require revenue to play. Is that right?
That's true. There are a lot of investors that require revenue, but not all of them. And having an educated investor and that understands, in our case, medical devices, they know the path and what's required. So
And just another follow on to support that valuation, you must have had a lot of comparables, right, in the industry? Is that how you supported it, or?
um, many different ways. There are some competitors that have. There's one in particular. I don't want to say their name, but they're publicly traded. Their valuations less than a half, maybe a quarter of what ours is today. And um, we don't try to compare ourselves to anybody. We have our financial model. We have our path, and our projections are our projections, and they're really conservative, and our own internal analysis, and we defend it. And I really don't care where somebody else is at.
Got it. Thank
Let
you.
me, Jen, let me just add one sentence to that, so that in presenting the projections, we just also are very clear what the assumptions are in the projections that you have to, and then we would we'd explain we would explain the assumptions and explain the information backing up the assumptions. That was one of the key things we did.
perfect. Thank you, Sam. And just while we're on that, someone had asked, did I understand you correctly that you have raised a total of about 10.8 million? Press to pre-series A was safe vehicle.
And pre-series A was safe note. Everything else was a convertible debt note. And yeah,
Mike, that's incorrect. Pre-seed was safe. Everything else was convertible. You said
yes,
pre-seed. Yeah, pre-seed was safe. Everything after that, our series seed and our pre-series A were convertible debt.
correct.
Sorry to
Okay.
correct you. Want to make sure we're accurate.
How much have you raised from individuals versus angel groups, and what insights do you have about the differences and what they look for and the dynamics in dealing with a group versus individuals? For example, relative level of risk aversion, hot buttons, time investment in getting them to the finish line, etc.
I'd have to look, but I'm guessing for angel groups, what, maybe 700,000, Sam? I'm not sure. I'm just guessing off the top of my head, roughly, in that neighborhood. The rest is all investors, angel investors, high net worth individuals.
We have 2 million from
Oh,
an institutional investor in all the
that's
previous
right.
rounds. It's about 700, 750 from organized angel groups, and everything else is just individuals.
And a quarter million from a smaller VC as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. So probably yeah, so rough number of this 10.73 million, we can pull the, but yeah, we're 3 million of it is institutional and organized angel groups, and a small VC. Balance is just individuals, of which is important, of which probably 30 to some over high 30% are actually physicians that understand what we're doing, that understand the industry. So about 30% are users and are essentially part of our target user group and target customer.
Okay. And I know that we are about out of time, so I just am gonna finish it off with this one last question is, what is your planned exit?
So, great question. We are growing the company as if we will never be acquired. You have to have value and be standalone. Some people build companies specifically to sell, and what if somebody else develops a better technology? You're out in left field, right? You're not going to exit. So we have a growth mindset. We're building a company that's going to have value. I personally do not want to go public. I don't believe we'll need to go public. We will get offers, and maybe we'll have offers that are too good to refuse, but we're laying the foundation to grow a company that will scale dramatically.
And we'll offer, and Mike, and we'll offer liquidity to our
Yes, exactly.
investors in secondary financing. That we anticipate that once we get to a certain amount of revenue, we will offer liquidity to our investors, the early investors, with secondary financing that want to keep growing with us. So that's how that's the exit is the liquidity event with secondary financing, as opposed to a final M&A transaction that keeps growing to at some point there will be a final M&A when it's but to build on Mike was said, the advice to everyone is build a great company. Don't worry, don't build a company to exit, build a great company. And that's what we're doing.
Amazing. Well, Mike and Sam, we want to thank you guys so much for being here with us today and being so open and honest about your fundraising journey. And we're grateful that everyone could join us on the call today. And I just want to mention again that we'll make sure to send this recording out to everyone who's registered so that you can rewatch it or share with any colleagues or friends who might be interested in this session. But thank you so much for everyone for joining. And I want to say happy holidays to everyone. Merry Christmas. I hope that everyone has a great holiday season, and we hope to see you at our CONNECTpreneur event soon.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Appreciate you attending. It's a pleasure to try to share some of our experiences with you. I hope it helps you. Sorry that we couldn't answer all the questions. I saw the one about side letters. Right? We have done a side letter, but I'm on LinkedIn. I'm really a pretty busy guy, so I might be slow to respond, but feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and we'll try to help you out.
Likewise.
Thank you guys
Perfect.
for joining, and Sam and Mike, I echo Sky's thoughts. Thank you guys for sharing your wisdom. This was super informative, very useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.